Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The first time I noticed them, I was brushing my teeth on a Tuesday morning. Just standing there, half asleep, mint foam dripping down my chin, when I saw it, a perfect handprint bruise wrapped around my upper arm. 5 distinct fingers. A palm. Like someone had grabbed me hard enough to leave their mark. But here's the thing. I live alone. If you're listening to this right now, probably tucked into bed, maybe with your lights dimmed low, I need you to do something for me. Check your arms, your shoulders, the back of your neck. Because what happened to me, it might already be happening to you. And now, our story begins. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a software engineer in Seattle. I tell you this because I need you to understand. I'm not someone who believes in the supernatural. I debug code for a living. I find logical explanations for glitches. But what happened to me over the past 3 months, there's no debugging this. That Tuesday morning in October, I stood frozen in my bathroom, toothbrush still buzzing in my hand. The bruise was deep purple at the center, fading to sickly yellow at the edges. I touched it gently and winced. It hurt like fresh trauma, though I had no memory of how it got there. I live in a secure apartment building in Capitol Hill. 20th floor, keycard access, security cameras in every hallway. My door has 2 deadbolts and a chain. I'm careful. Maybe too careful, my friends would say. But growing up as a woman in the city, you learn to be. I took a photo of the bruise with my phone. The image made my stomach turn. Those fingers were long, much longer than mine. The thumbprint was massive. This wasn't my hand. This wasn't anyone's hand I knew. At work, I couldn't focus. I kept rolling up my sleeve, checking if the bruise was still there. My coworker, Marcus, noticed. "Rough night?" he asked, gesturing at my arm with his coffee cup. I pulled my sleeve down quickly. Yeah, must have bumped into something. But we both knew bruises don't form in perfect handprint shapes from bumping into furniture. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every whisper of wind against my window made me jump. I'd installed a doorbell camera months ago. I checked the footage obsessively. Nothing. No one had entered or left my apartment. Wednesday morning brought a new horror. 2 more handprints. One on my left thigh, another wrapped around my ankle. Both the same massive size. Both fresh and painful. Both impossible. I called in sick to work. Spent the day researching. Sleep disorders, sleepwalking. Self-inflicted injuries during REM sleep. But nothing explained the size of these prints. I measured them. The handspan was at least 2 inches wider than mine. The fingers, God, the fingers were so long. That's when I started recording myself sleeping. I borrowed my friend Janet's old camcorder, the kind with night vision. Set it up on my dresser, pointed at my bed. The first few nights, nothing. I slept normally, tossed and turned like anyone else. The bruises faded to ugly yellow-green patches. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it all. Stress from work. Too many true crime podcasts, too much coffee. But then, Sunday night happened. I woke up at 3:47 a.m. with that feeling. You know the one. Like someone's watching you. The room was dark except for the red recording light on the camera. I lay perfectly still, heart hammering so hard I was sure it would wake the neighbors. That's when I felt it. Pressure on my wrist, firm, deliberate. Like fingers wrapping around. I screamed and fumbled for the light switch. Nothing there. My room was empty, but my wrist. Fresh red marks were already forming. I could see the outline of fingers appearing like a Polaroid photo developing. I grabbed the camera with shaking hands, rewound the footage. What I saw, I still can't fully process. The timestamp showed 3:44 a.m. I was sleeping on my side, blanket pulled up to my chin, everything normal. Then my arm started to move, slowly at first, like someone was pulling it. My sleeping face showed no reaction. The arm lifted higher, suspended in the air at an impossible angle. And then, the pressure points appeared. The flesh of my wrist compressed as if invisible fingers were squeezing. Hard. My sleeping self didn't even flinch. I've watched that footage probably 100 times now. I've shown it to friends, to my therapist. They all see the same thing. My arm moving by itself, the skin indenting, the bruises forming in real time. But no one can explain it. Janet suggested I call the police, but what would I say? Officer, invisible hands are bruising me while I sleep. They'd put me on a psychiatric hold. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, took a different approach. "Sarah," she said during our emergency session, "have you considered that these might be memories? Body memories from trauma your mind has suppressed?" I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted such a simple explanation. But I knew these weren't memories. They were happening now, fresh, real, and getting worse because the handprints were moving. No longer just arms and legs. They were appearing on my ribs, my back, places I couldn't reach myself even if I tried. And always, that same massive hand, those same impossibly long fingers. I stopped sleeping, started living on energy drinks and sheer paranoia, but you can't run from sleep forever. The body demands its due. And 3 days into my insomnia experiment, I collapsed at work. I woke up in the hospital, the fluorescent lights hurt my eyes. A nurse was checking my IV, and I saw her face change when she looked at my arms. "Honey," she said softly, "is someone hurting you? You can tell me, we can help." The bruises had multiplied while I was unconscious. Both arms now, my shoulders. Even one on my neck, fingers wrapped around like someone had tried to. "I need to see the security footage," I whispered. She looked confused. "What footage?" "From my room, while I was sleeping. Please, I need to know if anyone..." But the hospital doesn't record patients sleeping. Privacy laws. Of course. Dr. Martinez visited me there. Brought a colleague, Dr. Reese, a sleep specialist. They ran tests, EEG, polysomnography. Watched me sleep behind glass like I was some kind of experiment. And yes, they saw it happen. Saw my body move, saw the bruises form, saw nothing that could cause it. "There has to be a scientific explanation," Dr. Reese kept muttering. But I could see the fear in his eyes, the way his hands shook as he took notes. They discharged me with sleeping pills and a referral to a neurologist. But I never made that appointment. Because that night, alone in my apartment, I discovered something that changed everything. I'd been focusing on the handprints themselves, their size, their pattern, but I hadn't thought about timing. So I mapped them. Every bruise, when it appeared, where it appeared, and that's when I saw it. They weren't random. The first handprint, left upper arm. Second night, left thigh and ankle. Third, right wrist. The pattern continued, methodical, deliberate, like someone was examining me, testing grip points, learning. I pulled out my laptop, started searching. Unexplained bruising, handprint marks, sleep phenomena. Most results were about abuse victims or religious hysteria. But buried deep in a form from 2012, I found a thread that made my blood freeze. Anyone else getting grabbed by the tall ones while sleeping? The post was from username NightmareFuel87. They described exactly what was happening to me. The handprints, the impossible size, the systematic pattern. But the thread only had 3 replies before it was deleted. The last one simply said, "Stop talking about this. They don't like being noticed." I tried to find NightmareFuel87. Searched every platform. Nothing. Like they'd been erased from the internet entirely. That's when I started leaving lights on. All of them. My apartment glowed like a beacon. My electric bill tripled. I didn't care. Light felt like protection, even if it was just an illusion. But the hands, they didn't care about light. The bruises kept appearing, more aggressive now, overlapping. Sometimes I'd wake up with my body in positions I couldn't achieve while conscious. Legs bent at weird angles, arms twisted behind my back, always sore, always marked. I installed more cameras, different angles, motion sensors, even a thermal imaging camera I couldn't really afford. I wanted to catch something, anything, that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. What I caught was worse than nothing. Last week, everything escalated. I woke up not in my bed, but standing in my living room, facing the window, arms outstretched like I was reaching for something. Or something was positioning me. My neighbor, Mrs. Watanabe from 20B, was in the hallway when I stumbled out of my apartment that morning, desperate for human contact. She took one look at me and dropped her grocery bag. Oranges rolled everywhere. "Sarah-chan," she whispered, using the Japanese honorific she'd adopted for me since I helped fix her computer last year. "Your face." I ran to the hallway mirror. The bruises on my cheeks were so dark they looked like paint, like someone had dipped their fingers in purple ink and pressed them into my skin. But it was the pattern that made me sob right there in the hallway. The fingers. They were positioned exactly where you'd hold someone's face to make them look at something, to force them to see. Mrs. Watanabe helped me back to my apartment, made me tea with shaking hands. She's from Kyoto originally, told me her grandmother used to tell stories about the te no nai mono, the things without hands that borrow human touch. I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to me. "These aren't stories, Sarah-chan," she said quietly. "My grandmother, she had the marks too, before she disappeared." That stopped my hollow laughter cold. "Disappeared?" Mrs. Watanabe nodded slowly. "One morning, her bed was empty. But the sheets were twisted into the shape of a person, like something had pulled her through the fabric of reality itself. I wanted to dismiss it as folklore, old country superstition. But the way her eyes darted to the corners of my apartment, the way she clutched her teacup like a shield, she believed every word. After she left, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called my mom in Denver. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the fight about me not coming home for Christmas. But I needed to hear her voice. "Sarah Bear?" She sounded surprised, happy. It broke my heart a little. "Mom," I started, then stopped. "How do you tell your mother that invisible hands are mapping your body while you sleep? How do you explain that you're terrified you'll vanish like Mrs. Watanabe's grandmother?" "What's wrong, baby? Are you sleeping okay?" Mothers always know, always. I told her everything. The bruises, the footage, the floating, the shadows. I expected skepticism, maybe gentle suggestions about stress or finding a nice therapist. Instead, I got silence. Long, heavy silence. "Mom? Sarah?" Her voice was different now, careful. "Do you remember when you were little, maybe 5 or 6, you used to complain about the tall people in your room at night?" My blood turned to ice. "What?" "You'd wake up screaming. Said they were measuring you. We thought it was nightmares. Growth spurts. You'd sleep in our bed and you'd have these marks. The pediatrician said it was nothing. Kids bruise easily. But your dad never believed that." "Why didn't you tell me this?" My voice cracked. "Because it stopped when you turned 7. Just stopped. And we thought, we hoped, we prayed it was over." "Mom, what aren't you telling me?" Another long pause. "Your dad's sister, your Aunt Claire, the one who died before you were born? She didn't die, Sarah. She disappeared. They found her apartment covered in handprints, bruises on the walls, on the ceiling, like she'd been grabbed and pulled through something. The family doesn't talk about it. Too painful, too impossible. I hung up. I couldn't process this, couldn't accept that this thing, whatever it was, had been stalking my family across generations. That night, I did something desperate. I live-streamed my sleep. I set up my laptop, created a throwaway YouTube account. "Help me solve this mystery," I titled it. No description. Just me, sleeping. Or trying to. The chat started slow. A few night owls, making jokes. Then someone typed, "Why are you doing this?" I explained through chat. The bruises, the handprints, the fear. Most people left. The ones who stayed, they were either fascinated or frightened. At 2:47 a.m., the viewer count was down to 12. That's when user DeepSleeper95 typed, "Something's wrong with your shadow." I was already asleep by then, but I've watched the recording hundreds of times now. My shadow, it didn't match my body. It was standing while I lay in bed. It moved independently, gestured at things off camera, and then the power went out. Not just my apartment, the whole building, the whole block. The live stream cut to black, but 3 viewers managed to screenshot the last frame. In that screenshot, you can see them. All of them. The room was full of tall figures, surrounded my bed like doctors around an operating table. Their hands, God, their hands were enormous. Too many knuckles. Fingers that bent in ways that hurt to look at. And they were all reaching for me. I woke up 6 hours later, not in my bed, not in my apartment. I was on the roof of my building, completely naked, covered in more bruises than skin. The door to the roof was still locked from the inside. Security footage showed no one entering or leaving. But I remembered. For the first time, I remembered. Fragments, flashes, being lifted, carried, passed between those horrible hands like a specimen. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that I could hear them. Not with my ears, in my mind. A language that wasn't words but pure meaning, pressed directly into my consciousness. "Almost ready," they were saying. "Almost complete. The bloodline nearly mapped. The gateway nearly marked. Gateway?" That word echoed in my skull for days. I stopped going to work, stopped answering calls, started researching frantically. Gateway to what? Marked for what? And why my bloodline? Why my family? I found others, through obscure forums, through encrypted chat rooms, through whispered connections in the comment sections of creepypasta videos. People like me, families like mine, all with the same story, handprints, disappearances, generations of selection. One woman in Portland. Her entire maternal line had vanished. 6 women over 80 years, all found the same way. Beds twisted into human shapes, walls covered in handprint bruises. A man in Boston sent me photos. His brother, his father, his grandfather, all had the marks. All disappeared on their 30th birthday. He was 29 and covered in bruises. There was a pattern. There was always a pattern. We started a Discord server. Private, encrypted, 17 of us at first, sharing photos, comparing bruise patterns, looking for answers. We called ourselves the Marked. Not creative, but accurate. That's when we found Dr. Eliza Crenshaw. Dr. Crenshaw was a quantum physicist who'd lost her daughter to the handprints 20 years ago. Since then, she dedicated her life to understanding what took her. She'd amassed data, hundreds of cases, thousands of photos, and a theory that made my brain hurt. "They're not from here," she explained during a video call, her face gaunt from decades of obsession. "Not from our dimension, not from our reality. They exist in the spaces between. The folds in space-time, places our physics says should be empty but aren't." "But why the bruises?" someone asked. "Why the handprints?" "They're mapping us," she said simply, "learning our physical structure, our pressure points, our anchor points to this reality. The bruises aren't just marks, think of them as coordinates, reference points for something bigger." "Bigger like what?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. like pulling us through, like taking us from this dimension to wherever they are. But they can't just grab us. Physics doesn't work that way. They need to map every point of contact, every place where our matter intersects with the fabric of space. Only when the map is complete can they extract us. The Discord went silent. We all knew what that meant. We'd all seen our bruise coverage increasing. Mine was up to 70% now. Others were worse. A user named Touched by Them typed, "How long do we have?" Dr. Crenshaw's face crumbled a little. Based on my data, once you hit 90% coverage, days, maybe a week, then you're gone. I did the math in my head. At my current rate, I had maybe 2 weeks left. But Dr. Crenshaw wasn't done. There might be a way to stop it, or at least slow it down. It's theoretical, dangerous. But what? I practically screamed at my laptop. They map you while you sleep because that's when your consciousness is loose, detached, easier to manipulate. But what if you never fully sleep? What if you maintain a state of conscious awareness even during REM? Lucid dreaming, someone suggested. More than that, lucid resistance, training your mind to fight back even while your body rests. It's not a cure, but some subjects have reported the bruising slows, even stops, as long as they maintain awareness. That night, I started training. Meditation apps, lucid dreaming techniques. Anything to keep some part of my mind awake and fighting. The first few nights were disasters. The bruises came anyway, but then something changed. I became aware during an episode. Not fully awake, but present. I could feel them around me. Those impossible hands reaching through dimensions to touch my skin. And for the first time, I could resist. Not much, like trying to push through thick honey, but I could make them work for it. The bruises that night were lighter, fewer. I'd found something. Not a solution, but a weapon. I shared my success with the marked. Others tried it, some succeeded. Some disappeared mid-call, their screens going dark, their accounts never logging in again. We started losing people faster. The tall ones didn't like us organizing, didn't like us resisting. The bruises became more aggressive, deeper. Some woke up with fractures where the grip was too strong. Touched by Them sent a final message. They're angry. They're coming for all of us now. Don't let them finish the account deleted. Another one gone. And then I made a discovery that changed everything. I was going through Dr. Crenshaw's research files. Thousands of pages she'd shared with our dwindling group. Photos, medical records, police reports, looking for anything we'd missed. That's when I found the pattern within the pattern. The disappearances, they weren't random. They followed ley lines. Those ancient paths that New Age folks claim connect sacred sites. But what if they weren't spiritual at all? What if they were thin spots? Places where the dimensional walls were weaker. I mapped every disappearance against known ley line intersections. Nearly perfect correlation. Seattle had 3 major intersections. Portland had 5. Boston was practically a dimensional hub, but more importantly, the tall ones could only take people at these points. That's why they moved us while we slept. Why I woke up in different positions. They were trying to align us with the weak spots, to position us perfectly for extraction. I moved that night. Packed everything I could carry and drove east, away from Seattle, away from the ley lines. Found a motel in the middle of nowhere, Montana. Population 847. No reported ley lines for hundreds of miles. That night, no new bruises. For the first time in months, I woke up where I fell asleep. Same position, same clothes, untouched. I'd found their limitation. They could mark us anywhere, but they could only take us at specific points. The bruises were GPS coordinates, but they still needed the right location to pull us through. I shared this with the market. The 11 of us who were left immediately scattered. rural areas, dimensional dead zones, places the tall ones couldn't complete their work. But we all knew it was temporary. The bruises didn't fade, the map was still there, written on our skin. We were just postponing, hiding, and every night, even in our safe zones, we could feel them. Watching, waiting, angry. Dr. Crenshaw had a theory about that too. Her last theory, as it turned out. They're not just taking us randomly, she said during what would be her final call. They're selecting specific genetic markers, specific bloodlines. We're not victims. We're ingredients. Components for something they're building on the other side. Building what? I asked. A bridge, she whispered. They're using our quantum signatures, our dimensional anchors, to build a permanent gateway. Each person they take becomes part of the structure, and when they have enough... She never finished. The call cut out. Her account went dark, but we all understood. They weren't collecting us. They were constructing something from us, and we were the final pieces. 3 days ago, I noticed something new. The old bruises, the ones that had faded to yellow. They were darkening again. Reactivating, the map was completing itself without new contact. Yesterday, I woke up 2 miles from where I fell asleep, in a field, arranged in a perfect geometric pattern with symbols drawn in the dirt around me. Symbols that hurt to look at. Symbols that seem to twist reality at their edges. They're adapting, learning, overcoming their limitations. And this morning I found something that explains why I'm recording this now, why I'm rushing to get this story out before... I found a note in my handwriting, but not my words, not my language. It took me hours to decode it, using Dr. Crenshaw's cipher keys. When I finally translated it, my blood ran cold. The gateway requires one more. The bloodline must complete the circuit. Sarah Chen is the final component. Collection imminent. Resistance noted, but irrelevant. The architecture cannot be denied. They'd been using me to write their messages. To communicate with... what? Each other? Their superiors? I don't know, but I know what it means. I'm the last one they need. The final piece of whatever horrible bridge they're building between worlds. And based on the bruise patterns, based on the acceleration of symptoms, I have maybe 48 hours before they can take me. Before the map is complete enough to work even outside the ley lines. But I'm not going quietly. I've sent copies of all our research to journalists, scientists, anyone who might listen. I've painted my story on the walls of this motel room in permanent marker. Let them try to erase that. And I'm uploading this recording to every platform I can find. Because maybe, if enough people know, if enough people resist, if enough people understand what's happening, maybe we can stop them from finishing their bridge. Maybe we can strand them in their dimension and keep our world safe. Or maybe I'm just the rambling of a woman covered in bruises, slowly losing her grip on reality. Either way, you need to know. You need to watch. You need to check your bodies and protect your families and question every unexplained mark. The tall ones are real. They're collecting us. And they're almost done. I can see them now, even in daylight, standing at the edges of my vision, patient as always. They know I can't run anymore. The map is at 93%. My time is almost up. But before I go, before they take me to become part of their twisted architecture, I want you to remember something. We figured out their rules. We found their limitations. We learned to resist, even if only temporarily. That means they're not gods. They're not unstoppable. They're just things. Terrible things from somewhere else. And things can be fought. So fight. Share this story, wake up others, build a resistance. Because I might be the last component they need for this bridge. But there will be other bridges. Other collections. Other families marked for dimensional harvest. Don't let them work in shadow. drag them into the light, make noise, make connections, make it harder for them to operate unnoticed, and please, God, please, if you start seeing bruises, don't wait like I did. Don't dismiss them. Don't rationalize. Run. Hide. Fight. Do whatever it takes to stay incomplete, to stay human, to stay here. The sun is setting now. I can feel them getting closer, bolder. The walls of reality are thinning around me. I might not make it through tonight, but you might. All of you listening might. If you take this seriously, if you spread the word, if you refuse to be silent victims. So, I'll ask one more time. Check your arms. Check your legs. Check your neck. Look for the handprints. Look for the patterns. And if you find them, don't let them finish the map. This is Sarah Chen, signing off. Whatever happens next, remember my name. Remember our names. Remember that we fought back. And if you wake up tomorrow with unexplained bruises, you'll know what to do. Fight, resist, survive. And whatever you do, don't let them build their bridge with your bones. Still with me? Good. Because I need to tell you one last thing. This morning, I found a note in my handwriting that I don't remember leaving. It says, they can hear the recordings. They know about the others. Stop spreading the word or they'll accelerate the schedule. But I can't stop. People need to know, you need to know, even if it means they come for me tonight. So please, if this story scared you, share it. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. And if you've experienced something similar, God help us all. Let me know, because we need to find each other before it's too late, before they finish their collection, before the tall ones complete whatever cosmic inventory they're taking of humanity, one bruise at a time. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them. And remember, check your arms in the morning. Story number 2. The book was already on my nightstand when I woke up this morning. I know exactly what you're thinking, but I'm telling you, I returned it yesterday. I watched Mrs. Henderson scan it at the Millbrook Public Library counter. I heard that little beep. I saw her place it on the returns cart. I even made small talk about the weather while she processed it. Yet, here it sits. Same worn burgundy cover. Same gold lettering spelling out the Keeper's Collection. Same musty smell of old paper and something else. Something I can't quite place. If you're still listening, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about a library book. This is about what happens when you read the wrong story. When you open a door that should have stayed closed. When you ignore every warning sign because you think you're too rational, too modern, to believe in things that go bump in the night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this all started. And please stay until the end. Because I need someone else to know, just in case. The story begins now. 3 weeks ago, I was just another insomniac browsing the Millbrook Public Library at 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. You know the type. Bags under my eyes. Third cup of coffee going cold in my travel mug. Desperately searching for something. Anything. To help me sleep. The self-help section had failed me. The meditation audiobooks made me more anxious. Even the boring history documentaries couldn't knock me out anymore. That's when I found myself in the basement. Now, if you've never been to a small-town library basement, let me paint you a picture. Fluorescent lights that flicker just enough to be annoying. That distinct smell of old paper mixed with industrial carpet cleaner. Rows and rows of forgotten books that nobody's touched in decades. The kind of place where you half expect to find a skeleton studying for finals. I was running my fingers along the spines, not really reading the titles, when my hand stopped, just stopped. Like it hit an invisible wall right in front of a book I'd never seen before. The Keeper's Collection by someone named M. Harrow. No dust on it. That should have been my first warning. Everything else down there looked like it hadn't been touched since the Clinton administration, but this book? Pristine. Well, pristine might be the wrong word. It was old, definitely old. The burgundy leather was cracked in places, and the gold lettering had that tarnished look. But no dust, not a speck. I pulled it out, and I swear the temperature dropped 10 degrees. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and know someone was just talking about you? That sudden awareness that makes the hair on your neck stand up? That's what holding this book felt like. The pages were yellowed but intact. No library card pocket, no barcode, no stamps showing when it had been checked out. Nothing to indicate it belonged to the library at all, except it was there, on their shelf, in their building. I flipped to a random page and read, "The keeper remembers all who read these words. The keeper knows the weight of sleepless nights. The keeper offers rest for those willing to pay." I actually laughed out loud in a silent library basement. Because of course, I'd find some Victorian Gothic nonsense when all I wanted was something boring enough to knock me out. But you know what? I was desperate. And it was almost closing time. And Mrs. Henderson barely looked at the book when I handed it to her. "Find everything okay, dear?" she asked, scanning my library card. "Yeah, just some light reading." She held the book for a moment, frowning. System's not recognizing this one. Must be from the old collection. Let me just... She typed something, shrugged, and handed it to me. 2 weeks, though something tells me you'll bring it back sooner. I should have asked what she meant. I should have paid attention to the way she wiped her hands on her cardigan after touching it. I should have noticed how she immediately excused herself to wash her hands, but I didn't. I just wanted to go home and sleep. That first night, I'll admit, the book worked better than ambient. I made it through maybe 10 pages before my eyes started getting heavy. The writing was odd. Not quite stories, not quite poems. More like memories, dreams. Each entry started the same way. The keeper collected this on a Tuesday in October when the moon was dark. The keeper collected this during the first snow when the streets were empty. The keeper collected this in the small hours when only the cats were watching. Collected what? I kept wondering. But the rhythm of the words, the repetition, it was hypnotic. I barely remember putting the book on my nightstand, barely remember turning off the light, but I remember the dream. I was in a library, but not Millbrook's. This one was endless. Shelves that stretched up into darkness. Aisles that went on forever. And someone was shelving books. I could hear the soft thud of books sliding into place. The whisper of pages. The creak of a cart being pushed. "Hello," I called out. The sound stopped. "I'm looking for the exit." Silence. Then, footsteps. Slow. Measured, getting closer. I started walking faster. The footsteps matched my pace. I turned a corner, another endless aisle, another. The footsteps were right behind me now. I could feel breath on my neck. Cold breath that smelled like old paper and something else. Something sweet and rotten. I woke up gasping. 3:33 a.m., of course. But here's the thing. I'd slept 5 solid hours. More than I'd managed in weeks. So, the next night, I read more. The entries got stranger. The keeper collected this from Sarah Chen, who read past midnight despite her mother's warnings. She sleeps so soundly now. So very soundly in the stacks. The keeper collected this from Thomas Murphy, who thought books were just paper and ink. He learned otherwise. The keeper taught him about the weight of words. The keeper collected this from Amy Thornton, who asked too many questions. Questions have prices. The keeper always collects. I started noticing things. Little things. The way my bookmark never stayed where I put it. How I'd find the book open to pages I didn't remember reading. How the text seemed different sometimes. Like the words were rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking. But I was sleeping. Every night I'd read until my eyes got heavy, usually only 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'd sleep. Deep, dreamless sleep. Except for the footsteps. Every night somewhere in that deep sleep I'd hear them. Slow, measured, like someone walking between library shelves. And every morning I'd wake up at exactly 3:33 a.m., heart racing, mouth dry, with the absolute certainty that someone had been in my room. By the end of the first week, I noticed other things too. Books in my apartment weren't where I'd left them. My own books, they'd be slightly out of order, or turned to spine in, or moved to different shelves entirely. I told myself I was doing it in my sleep. Sleepwalking. Stress. The lack of proper rest finally catching up with my brain. I installed a camera app on my phone, set it to record while I slept. The footage showed nothing. Just me, sleeping peacefully. Too peacefully. I didn't move, didn't shift. For 8 hours straight, I lay there like a corpse. But the book still moved. After 2 weeks, I'd had enough. Good sleep or no sleep, something was wrong. The entries in the book were getting more personal, more specific. The keeper collected this from Michael Reeves, who lives alone in apartment 4B. He leaves his window unlocked. He drinks coffee that's gone cold. He thinks cameras will show him the truth. That was my apartment number, my name, my window that I always forgot to lock, my cold coffee, but it was the next entry that made my blood run cold. The keeper collected this from Jennifer Walsh, who lived 3 doors down. She knocked on Michael's door last Tuesday. She wanted to borrow sugar. She never made it back to her apartment. The keeper needed her story. Stories of neighbors who care, stories of small kindnesses. The keeper collects them all. Jennifer Walsh, I remembered her. Sweet old lady who always said good morning in the hallway. Always had treats for the building's stray cat. I hadn't seen her in 2 weeks since I'd started reading the book. I ran to her apartment, knocked, no answer. The door was unlocked. Inside, nothing. Not just that she wasn't there, nothing. No furniture, no pictures, no signs anyone had ever lived there at all. Just bare walls and that industrial carpet smell and a single book on the floor. The keeper's collection. The same book, or no, different. I picked it up with shaking hands, opened it. Every page was filled with Jennifer's handwriting, her memories, her stories. That time she won a spelling bee in 3rd grade, her first kiss under the bleachers, the day her husband died, the loneliness that followed. All of it. Every moment of her 73 years compressed into pages that smelled like lavender and loss. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, measured. I knew who it was before I turned around. Mrs. Henderson stood in the doorway, but not quite right. She looked the same, but her shadow was wrong. Too long, too dark, moving independently of her body. "You shouldn't be here, Michael," she said softly. "This is a collection room now. The keeper's private shelves." "What did you do to her?" "I didn't do anything. The book did. The keeper did. She was lonely, Michael. So very lonely. She read the book looking for stories about families, about connection, about belonging. And the keeper gave her what she wanted. Now, she belongs to the collection. Forever shelved, forever remembered. Isn't that better than dying alone and forgotten?" "You're insane." "No, I'm employed. There's a difference." She stepped into the room. Her shadow stretched across the floor like spilled ink. "We all serve in different ways. I manage the earthly library. I maintain the collection. I ensure the right books find the right readers, and sometimes I check on those who've borrowed more than they can return." I backed against the wall. The book in my hands grew heavier, warmer, like it was alive. "Take it," she said. "It's yours anyway. The keeper wants you to understand, to see the full picture before you make your final choice." "What choice?" "You said I had to finish it, that I'd already made the deal." She smiled. That same sad smile from the library. "There's always a choice, Michael. The keeper isn't cruel, just necessary. Stories need to be preserved. Memories need to be collected. Dreams need to be shelved. Someone has to do it. Someone has to walk the aisles between sleeping and waking. Someone has to ensure the collection grows. And if I refuse, then you never sleep again, never truly rest. The book will always be there, on your nightstand, in your hands, in your mind, growing heavier, growing hungrier, until you're too tired to refuse any more. She turned to leave, then paused. Ask yourself this, Michael. What's worse, an eternity of service in a quiet library, or an eternity of sleepless madness in a loud world? She left. I stood there holding Jennifer's life in my hands, reading her stories, her fears, her dreams, all of it collected, all of it preserved, all of it gone. I skipped work and drove straight to the library. Mrs. Henderson was at the front desk, same as always, same cardigan, same careful smile, as if I hadn't just seen her in Jennifer's empty apartment, as if we hadn't just had that conversation. Back already? She asked as I approached. I need to return this. I placed the book on the counter. My hands were shaking. She looked at it, looked at me. Are you sure? You seem tired, dear. I'm sure. She sighed and picked up the scanner, beeped it across the cover, frowned. That's odd. It's not showing as checked out. What? According to this, you don't have any items. When did you say you borrowed it? 2 weeks ago, you checked me out. You said the system didn't recognize it, remember? You did a manual entry. She studied my face, then very quietly. Did you finish it? What? The book. Did you read it all the way through? No, why does that matter? She leaned forward. I could smell peppermint and something else, something familiar. Books. Some books need to be finished. It's like making a deal, you understand? You can't just stop halfway through. That's ridiculous. It's just a book. Is it? She pulled the book closer. Tell me, Mr. Reeves, have you been sleeping better? I didn't answer, couldn't answer, because she was right. Despite everything, despite the dreams and the moved books and the growing certainty that something was very wrong, I'd been sleeping, really sleeping. The Keeper's collection, she continued, has been part of this library for longer than I've been here, longer than anyone remembers. It comes and goes, finds people who need it, people who are desperate enough to make a trade without realizing they're making one. A trade? Rest for access. The Keeper needs new collections, you see, new stories, new memories, new dreams. She pushed the book back toward me. You can leave it here, but it won't matter. It'll find its way back. It always does, until you finish it, until you complete the transaction. You're insane. Am I? She smiled sadly. Check your nightstand when you get home, Mr. Reeves. See if I'm right. I left the book there, slammed it down on the counter and walked out. Drove home, breaking every speed limit. Ran up to my apartment. The book was on my nightstand. Same worn burgundy cover. Same gold lettering. Same musty smell. But now there was a bookmark, a photograph. Old, black and white. A woman shelving books in a library I didn't recognize. I looked closer. It was Mrs. Henderson, but younger, much younger, wearing clothes from, the 1950s? And behind her, barely visible in the shadows between the shelves, a figure, tall, thin, face obscured, but something about the way it stood, the way its head tilted, like it was listening. I turned the photo over, written in faded ink, Margaret Henderson, head librarian, Millbrook Public Library, 1953, present. The Keeper remembers. Present, 1953 to present, that would make her. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Breathing, slow, measured, and then, in a voice like pages turning, finish the book, Michael. The Keeper is patient, but not infinitely so. You've slept so well these past weeks. Don't you want to keep sleeping? Who is this? You know who this is. You've heard me walking. Every night, getting closer, shelf by shelf, book by book. Finish the story, or I'll finish it for you. The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the next. The book sat on my nightstand, but I refused to open it. I tried everything, threw it in the garbage, burned it in my sink, drove it to the next town and left it in a dumpster. Every morning, 3:33 a.m. There it was. By the fourth night without sleep, I was hallucinating, seeing figures between the bookshelves at the grocery store, hearing footsteps in the library sections of department stores, finding books in my apartment I'd never bought. Old books, books with no covers, books written in languages I didn't recognize, books filled with names and dates and the word collected over and over and over. My neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, knocked on my door on the 5th day. "Michael, honey, are you all right? We haven't seen you in days." I opened the door a crack. She gasped. "Oh, sweetie, you look terrible. Are you sick?" "Can't sleep," I mumbled. "Well, no wonder. It sounds like you're renovating in there. All that walking around at night. Back and forth, back and forth. Are you redecorating?" I stared at her. I haven't been walking around." "Oh," she frowned. "Well, someone has, every night, around 3:30, just pacing, like they're looking for something." I closed the door, locked it, put a chair against it. The book was open on my coffee table. I know I didn't put it there, I know I didn't open it. But there it was, turned to a page near the end. The keeper collected this from Margaret Henderson, who asked for more time. Time is the most expensive currency. She pays still, shelf by shelf, year by year, book by book. The keeper is generous with those who serve. I picked up the book. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Too tired for that. Too tired for fear. Too tired for anything but the truth. The last pages were different, newer. The ink still wet, still writing itself as I watched. The keeper will collect from Michael Reeves, who thought sleep was worth any price. He will learn, they all learn, that some doors, once opened, never truly close. Some books, once read, become part of you. Some trades, once made. I didn't need to read the rest. I understood now. The book wasn't just a book. It was a contract. Every page I'd read, every night I'd slept, I'd been agreeing to something. Trading something. But what? What had I traded? I stood up, walked to my bookshelf, ran my fingers along the spines of my owned books, pulled one out at random, opened it. The pages were blank, another. Blank, another. All of them. Every book I owned. Every story I'd ever loved. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "One more page, Michael. Just one more page and it's over. You can sleep, really sleep, forever if you want. Just finish the book." I looked at the keeper's collection. One page left, one unread page. I could feel him now, the keeper, not outside anymore, not in the hallway, in the room, standing behind me, breathing that cold breath that smelled like old paper and decay, waiting. "What are you?" I whispered. No answer. Just a hand, cold, thin, too many fingers, reaching past me. Pointing at the book, I picked it up, turned to the last page. My hands were steady now, calm. What was the point of fear when you'd already lost? The page was a mirror, not literally, but I saw myself in the words. Every sleepless night, every desperate hour, every moment I'd have traded anything, for just a little rest. And at the bottom, in fresh ink, the keeper collects stories. The keeper preserves memories. The keeper offers rest to the restless. All contracts must be completed. All collections must be shelved. Welcome to the library, Michael. Your shift begins at 3:33. I understood then. Understood why Mrs. Henderson had worked at the library since 1953. Understood why the book always returned. Understood what I'd traded for those 2 weeks of perfect sleep. I wasn't going to be collected. I was going to be a collector. The room was fading. Or, no, changing. Walls becoming shelves. Floor becoming that industrial carpet. Fluorescent lights flickering overhead, and footsteps. So many footsteps. All the others who'd made the trade, who'd read the book, who'd chosen sleep over everything else. No, I dropped the book. No, I won't. I didn't agree to this. But I had, page by page, night by night. Every time I'd chosen to keep reading. Every time I'd ignored the warnings. Every time I'd put sleep above the growing certainty that something was wrong. The keeper's hand was on my shoulder now, cold, patient, eternal. And then I heard it. My alarm. 6 a.m. Not 3:33, 6 o'clock. I jerked awake, in my bed in my apartment. Morning sunlight streaming through the windows. The book was on my nightstand, closed. Just a book, just paper and ink and old leather. I laughed, actually laughed. A dream, a stress dream. Too many horror movies and not enough sleep, and I reached for my phone to turn off the alarm. My hand passed right through it. I tried again. Nothing, like I wasn't quite there. The door to my apartment opened. My landlord walked in with a young couple. My landlord who had a key for emergencies, who I'd never seen use it. As you can see, he was saying, it's fully furnished. The previous tenant just disappeared, left everything. Strangest thing, but hey, your gain, right? Rent's cheap and you can move in immediately. What happened to him? The woman asked, looking around my apartment, my things, my life. No one knows, just stopped showing up to work, stopped answering his phone. Police investigated, but he shrugged. Sometimes people just vanish. Though between you and me, he lowered his voice. The neighbors say they still hear footsteps at night. Around 3:30, like someone pacing, looking for something. They left. I tried to follow, couldn't. Something held me in place, something that smelled like old paper and decay. I looked at the book on the nightstand, really looked at it. It was open now, to the very last page, the one I'd never quite finished reading. And there, in fresh ink, still wet. The keeper collected this from Michael Reeves on a Thursday morning when the sun was bright. He serves now, in the spaces between, in the moments before dawn, in the sound of footsteps in empty libraries. He helps others find the book, helps them choose rest or freedom, sleep or sovereignty. The collection grows. The keeper remembers. The keeper always remembers. I felt myself fading, not disappearing, just shifting, becoming something else. Something that walks between shelves, something that breathes cold air, something that watches and waits and collects. But before I went, before I became whatever Margaret Henderson had become, whatever all the others had become, I saw one last thing. You, yes, you, listening to this, lying in your bed, fighting sleep. Wondering if this is just a story, just words, just fiction. Check your nightstand, go on. Check it. That book that wasn't there before? The one with the burgundy cover and gold lettering? The one that smells like old paper and something else? Don't open it. Or do, the keeper is patient. The keeper remembers. And somewhere in a library that exists between moments, between breaths, between the choice to sleep and the need to stay awake, I'm shelving books, walking those endless aisles, pushing my cart, waiting for you, for your story, for your collection. Sweet dreams. Wait, do you hear that? Those footsteps? That's not part of the story. That's check your nightstand, please, before it's too late, or maybe it already is. The keeper always collects what's owed. Always. Now, sleep. Or at least try to. It's quiet now, too quiet, but not empty. That feeling crawling up your spine, that weight pressing on your chest, that's not your imagination. You're not alone. There's something behind the curtain. You haven't looked, not because you forgot, but because you're afraid to know. You heard the whisper, software wet, wrong, like breath dragged across broken glass. But you told yourself it was the wind, didn't you? That lie made you feel safe. Temporarily. Let me ask you, does the wind whisper your name? Does the wind tap lightly, again and again, from the same spot behind the curtain every night? Does the wind leave scratches on your window that weren't there this morning? Thin, sharp, like claws, like warnings. You don't remember opening the window. You never open the window. But it's unlocked now. You could check, you could stand up, you could walk over and pull the curtain back. But you won't, because you know. You know what's waiting, not because you've seen it, but because you felt it. In the quiet, in the dark. Every time you close your eyes, every time you wake up and your blanket is just slightly moved. Your door slightly cracked. You try to explain it. Your mind wants to explain it. But that whisper, that sound that only comes when you're alone, when everything is still, when the night is at its deepest, that's not a dream, that's a presence. It doesn't want your fear, it wants your attention. It feeds on the moment you doubt yourself. The second you wonder if you heard something, the instant your heart rate rises. That's when it leans closer. It's been patient, watching, learning you like prey. You ever notice it never shows up when the lights are on, when someone's in the room? It waits for the ritual, the brushing of your teeth, the turning off of lights, the last look at your phone, the deep breath just before sleep. That's when it wakes up. That's when it stirs behind the curtain. Sometimes it watches you all night. Sometimes it moves. A shift in the shadow. A faint creak on the floorboards. The sound of fabric sliding over skin. And when you don't check, when you ignore it, that's when it comes closer. Not fast, not loud, just closer. You might feel a cold spot on the bed. You might feel breath on your neck. You might hear a whisper in your ear that sounds almost like your voice. It copies, it mimics, it blends, not to confuse you, to prepare you, because soon it won't need the curtain, it won't need shadows, it will sit beside you, stand behind you, speak through you. You won't even know when it happens. You'll wake up, look in the mirror, and something will be off. Your eyes won't blink quite right, your smile will linger too long. Your reflection will move just a little after you do. And the people around you? They'll say you seem different. Not worse, just not you. But tonight you're still you. Still in control, for now. You could still check. You could still confront it. Pull the curtain back, face it, but deep down, you've already made your choice. You won't. Because you'd rather lie still. Let your eyes drift shut, and hope sleep comes quickly. And it will. But what you wake up as might not be the same. Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're not just a viewer, you're part of something bigger. Something that watches with you, that sits beside you as you watch, as you listen, as you wait. Because this story doesn't end when the screen fades to black. It follows you into the next room, into your dreams, into your reflection. If you liked this story, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss the next one, so we don't miss you, and comment below. Tell us the moment you stopped feeling alone. We're watching, we're listening, and we read everything. Now, go ahead, gain the courage to check the dark corners before you sleep. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, sleep well, if you can. Story number 3. They found my phone in the church parking lot 3 days later, still recording. The battery was dead, but when the police charged it, they discovered 27 minutes of footage that nobody can explain. I'm sharing this because I need answers, and because I can't stop hearing that song. Before I tell you what happened at Sarah Miller's wedding in Cedar Falls, Iowa, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a warning. And if you've ever been to a wedding where the organist played that particular song, the one that sounds like it's coming from somewhere much deeper than the church basement, then you already know why I can't sleep anymore. The story begins now. The morning of October 15th started like any perfect autumn Saturday in Iowa. Golden leaves drifted past my apartment window as I sipped coffee and checked my phone. Sarah had texted our bridesmaid group chat at 5:47 a.m. Way too early, but that was Sarah. Always the first one up, always planning something. Ladies, today's the day. See you at St. Matthew's at noon for hair and makeup. Don't forget your shoes. I smiled, remembering how we'd met freshman year at Iowa State. Sarah had this way of making everyone feel like they belonged, like they were part of something special. That's probably why she had 7 bridesmaids. Most people would call that excessive. Sarah called it surrounding yourself with love. St. Matthew's Lutheran Church sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, its white steeple reaching toward cloudless October sky. Built in 1887, the church had hosted hundreds of weddings, baptisms, funerals, the kind of place where generations of families had marked their milestones. Safe, familiar, normal. I pulled into the parking lot at 11:58, my bridesmaid dress hanging in the back seat. Other cars were already there. Sarah's parents' silver Honda, the photographer's van with Moments in Time photography painted on the side, and near the back, an old black sedan I didn't recognize. It looked out of place somehow. Too old, too quiet, like it had been sitting there since long before any of us arrived. Inside, the church smelled like flowers and furniture polish. Sarah stood in the middle of the bridal suite, surrounded by tulle and hairspray and nervous energy. She looked radiant, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't name. "Emma!" She grabbed my hands, squeezing tight. "You made it!" Of course I made it. I wouldn't miss this for anything. I studied her face. "You okay? You look nervous, happy, scared, all of it?" She laughed, but it sounded thin. "Is that normal?" "Totally normal. Hey, who owns that old black car out back?" Sarah's smile faltered for just a second. "What car?" "The sedan. Looks like something from the 50s. I don't know. Maybe someone from David's side." She turned away quickly. "Come on, let's get you into hair and makeup." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of curling irons and champagne. The other bridesmaids, Jessica, Megan, Ashley, Brooke, Tiffany, and Sarah's cousin Lisa, filled the room with chatter and laughter. Normal wedding day stuff. But I kept catching Sarah staring at nothing, her fingers worrying the edge of her grandmother's handkerchief. At 2:30, the photographer started arranging us for pictures. "Okay, ladies, let's get some shots by the window. Natural light is gorgeous today." We lined up, bouquets in hand. Through the glass I could see guests starting to arrive. David's family from Des Moines. Sarah's work friends. Her elderly Aunt Margaret, walking slowly with her cane. And behind them all, that black sedan. Still there, still empty. "Sarah," I whispered during a break between shots, "are you sure you're okay? You keep looking. There's something I need to tell you." Her voice was barely audible. About the church, about why we really chose it. But before she could continue, the wedding coordinator swept in. 15 minutes, everyone. Gentlemen are in position. Time to line up." Sarah grabbed my arm. Her fingers were ice cold. "Emma, if anything happens, if anything seems wrong, promise me you'll get everyone out." "What?" "Sarah, what are you talking about?" "Promise me." I promise, but nothing's going to happen. This is your wedding day." She tried to smile, failed. "Right, my wedding day." We lined up outside the sanctuary doors. I could hear the organ warming up inside, running through scales and snippets of traditional wedding songs. But underneath, so faint I almost missed it, there was another melody, something I didn't recognize, something that made my teeth ache. The coordinator checked her watch. 2 minutes. Sarah stood at the back of our line, her father beside her. In her white dress, holding her grandmother's Bible, she looked like a picture from a vintage wedding album. Beautiful, timeless, and absolutely terrified. The sanctuary doors opened. The first thing I noticed was how full the church was. Every pew packed with smiling faces. David stood at the altar with his groomsmen, hands clasped in front of him, that nervous, excited smile guys get when they're trying not to cry. Reverend Johnson waited in his white robes, prayer book in hand. Everything looked perfect. Postcard perfect, too perfect. The organist, Mrs. Henley, who'd been playing at St. Matthew's since before I was born, began the processional. But the note sounded wrong somehow, like she was playing in a key that didn't quite exist. The melody we'd rehearsed yesterday afternoon had shifted into something else, something older. Jessica went first, then Megan. Their heels clicked on the hardwood aisle. Click, click, click. The sound echoed strangely, like the church was bigger than it should be. My turn. I stepped through the doorway and the air felt different inside the sanctuary, heavier, like breathing through wet cotton. The stained glass windows that usually painted rainbow patterns on the floors showed only gray light. Storm light, but the sky outside had been clear. I focused on David's face, kept walking. Smile, step, smile, step. The pews on either side were full of people I recognized, but their faces seemed wrong when I wasn't looking directly at them, like those old paintings where the eyes follow you. Mrs. Henley's playing grew louder. That underneath melody was clearer now. It reminded me of something. A song my grandmother used to hum when she thought no one was listening. A song she'd learned from her grandmother. A song that predated the church itself. I reached my position at the altar, turned to watch the others process. Ashley, Brooke, Tiffany, Lisa. Each of them walked a little faster than the one before, like they were fighting the urge to run. Then the music shifted. Here Comes the Bride. But layered underneath, that other song, the one that made my bones ache. Sarah appeared in the doorway. She looked luminous, that's the only word for it, like she was lit from within. Her father held her arm, but I could see his knuckles were white. They started down the aisle. That's when I noticed the empty spaces. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, but no. Gaps had appeared in the pews. People I'd seen just moments before were gone. Not gone like they'd stepped out. Gone like they'd never been there at all. Sarah kept walking. Her smile never wavered, but tears rolled down her cheeks. Happy tears, scared tears. I couldn't tell. More empty spaces, whole rows now. The church was emptying like water draining from a sink, but nobody was moving. They were just not there anymore. Mrs. Henley's playing grew more intense. The wrong notes, the impossible harmonies filled the space where the people had been. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to grab Sarah and get out. But my feet wouldn't move. None of us could move. Sarah reached the altar. Her father kissed her cheek, and then he was gone too. Not walked away. Gone. Sarah's smile finally cracked. "David," she whispered. He took her hands. "It's okay. We knew this might happen." Knew what might happen? I tried to ask, but no sound came out. Reverend Johnson opened his prayer book. The pages were blank. All of them. He began to speak anyway, words in the language that predated English, predated memory. Words that made the air shimmer. The church was nearly empty now. Just the wedding party, Mrs. Henley at the organ, and in the very back row, a figure in a black coat. I couldn't see their face, but I felt them watching, waiting. "Sarah," David said, his voice carrying despite the growing music. "I need you to remember what we talked about. The promise we made. I remember. Her voice was steady now, determined. But I'm scared. I know, so am I. The music reached a crescendo. The windows went completely dark, and then silence. In that silence, I heard my own heartbeat. Fast, frantic, like a bird trapped in a cage. We stood frozen at the altar. 7 bridesmaids, 6 groomsmen, the bride and groom, and Reverend Johnson with his blank book. And Mrs. Henley, whose fingers still moved over the organ keys, playing music none of us could hear. "We should begin," Reverend Johnson said. His voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Dearly beloved—" "Wait," Sarah interrupted. She turned to face us. What was left of us. "I need to tell them. They deserve to know." "Sarah, no," David warned. "The binding. They're my friends. Our friends. They deserve to know why they're here." My voice finally worked. "Sarah, what's happening? Where is everyone?" She looked at me with those terrified, determined eyes. "St. Matthew's isn't just a church, Emma. It's a threshold. Every 100 years it needs to be renewed, fed, or else, what comes through stays through," the figure in the black coat said. I hadn't heard them approach, but suddenly they were there, standing in the aisle. An old woman, older than anyone I'd ever seen. Her eyes were the color of old milk. "My great-great-grandmother made a deal," Sarah continued, "to save the town, to keep the door closed. 1 family, 1 wedding, every 100 years. The wedding party stays. Everyone else goes where?" Jessica's voice was shrill. "Away," the old woman said simply. "To the place between. They'll come back when it's over. Most of them, usually. This is insane. One of the groomsmen, Tyler, I think, started backing toward the door. I'm not staying for this." He made it 3 steps before the music started again, not from the organ this time, from everywhere, from the walls, the floor, the air itself. Tyler froze mid-step, his face a mask of terror, and then he folded. Like paper. Like he was being pressed between invisible hands. Smaller and smaller, until there was nothing left but a boutonniere on the floor. Someone screamed, maybe me. "The ceremony must continue," the old woman said. "It has begun. It must end. That is the rule." "Sarah," David took her hands again, "we can do this. Our families knew. They prepared us. That's why we fell in love, isn't it? 2 families bound by the same secret, the same duty. But our friends—" Sarah looked at us. "I'm so sorry. I thought maybe this time would be different, that we'd found a way around it." "There is no around," the old woman said. "Only through. Continue." Reverend Johnson cleared his throat. "Do you, David Michael Thompson, take Sarah Elizabeth Miller?" The words were wrong. Still English, but with something else woven through them. Something that made my skin crawl. David responded, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. "I do." One of the stained glass windows cracked. Beyond it, not the October afternoon we'd left behind, but something else. A sky the color of old bones. A landscape that hurt to perceive. "Do you, Sarah Elizabeth Miller, take David Michael Thompson?" Sarah's hands shook. She looked at me one last time. "I'm sorry, Emma, for all of it, but mostly for what comes next. I do." The crack spread. More windows, the walls themselves began to thin like morning mist. I could see through them to that other place. Things moved out there, things with too many angles. Things that had been waiting. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Iowa and the threshold of St. Matthew's, I pronounce you bound. You may kiss. They kissed, and the world shifted. I've watched the footage 100 times. The 27 minutes my phone recorded from where it fell in the parking lot. It shows the church from the outside, shows the windows going dark, shows the walls beginning to breathe, and then nothing. just an empty lot where St. Matthew's used to be. For 27 minutes, the church simply wasn't there, but I remember what happened inside. The kiss lasted forever, or maybe just a second. Time didn't work right in that place between places. We weren't in the church anymore, but we weren't anywhere else either. Just between. The wedding party stood in a circle now, though I don't remember moving. Sarah and David in the center, still kissing, while something else happened around them. Through them. They were changing, becoming something new, something that could hold the door closed for another 100 years. The old woman spoke, but not with her mouth. The words just existed, heavy and final. The binding is made, the threshold is sealed, the wedding party bears witness. I tried to move, to speak, to scream, but I was frozen, watching as Sarah and David began to glow, not with light, with something else, something that made the space between spaces shiver. One by one, the other members of the wedding party began to fade, not disappearing like the guests, fading, becoming transparent, becoming part of the barrier itself. "No," I managed to whisper. "Sarah, no." She turned to me, still glowing, still changing. "It's okay, Emma. This is what we were meant for. All those years of friendship, they were real, but they were also preparation. For this, I don't understand. The threshold needs anchors on both sides, the wedding party. You're the anchors on this side, to keep the door from opening all the way, to keep them from coming through." "Them?" She gestured to the things moving in that bone sky place. Closer now, always closer. The ones who came before, the ones who want to come back. The old woman's ancestors made a deal to keep them out. My family inherited that deal, and now it's renewed, David finished. His voice was different, older. For another 100 years. The other bridesmaids were almost gone now. Jessica, Megan, Ashley, Brooke, Tiffany, Lisa. I could see through them to that other place. They were becoming part of the wall between worlds. "Why am I still here?" I asked. Sarah smiled sadly. "Because you're the witness. Every binding needs one. Someone to remember. Someone to tell the story, to prepare the next generation. I don't want to remember this. I know, but you will. And in 100 years, when it's time again, you'll know what to do, who to find, how to prepare them." The church began to reform around us, walls solidifying, windows reappearing. But it wasn't quite the same, would never be quite the same. I could feel the others in the walls now, the wedding party, stretched thin, holding the line. Sarah and David were barely visible now, just shapes of light where the bride and groom should be. "Emma," Sarah's voice was wind through leaves. "The guests will be back soon. They won't remember. No one ever remembers except the witness. Tell them we had to leave. Family emergency, something believable. Sarah, please." "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for being here. Thank you for remembering." And then they were gone. All of them. The church was empty except for me and the old woman. "The binding is complete," she said. "The threshold is sealed. Until next time." "There won't be a next time," I said. "I won't let this happen again." She smiled. It was almost kind. That's what they all say, the witnesses. But when the time comes, when the walls start to thin and the things beyond start to press through, you'll do what needs to be done. You'll find the families, you'll arrange the wedding. You'll stand in this church and watch it happen again. No, yes, because the alternative is worse, much worse. She walked toward the door, leaving me alone in the empty church. At the threshold, she paused. "Your phone is in the parking lot. The footage will show an empty lot for 27 minutes. Don't try to explain it. No one will believe you anyway." And then she was gone too. The guests started returning about 10 minutes later, confused, disoriented. wondering why they were standing in the parking lot, why the wedding was over, where Sarah and David had gone. I told them about the family emergency, a convincing lie that explained everything and nothing. They believed it because the alternative was impossible. But I know the truth. I know where the wedding party went. I know why St. Matthew sometimes feels heavier than it should. Why the organ sometimes plays songs that were never written. Why there are names on the memorial wall that no one remembers. They're still there, all of them. Holding the line, keeping the door closed. And in 97 years, when the walls start to thin again, someone will find me. An old woman with milk-white eyes and terrible knowledge. And I'll tell them about the families, about the binding, about the price of keeping our world safe from what waits beyond. I'll hate myself for it, but I'll do it anyway, because Sarah was right, the alternative is worse. The church still stands on the corner of Maple and 3rd. Services every Sunday, weddings when the weather's nice, normal, safe, ordinary. But if you know what to look for, if you know what to listen for, you can feel them. The wedding party that vanished. Still there, still holding, still protecting us from what waits on the other side. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that song. The one underneath all the others. The one that predates the church. The one that holds the worlds apart. When I do, I remember Sarah's smile, her tears, her sacrifice. And I count the years until I have to watch it happen again. So that's my story. The wedding party that vanished during the ceremony. Maybe you think I'm making it up. Maybe you think it's just another ghost story. But next time you're at a wedding, next time the organ plays, listen carefully. Listen for the song underneath. The one that makes your teeth ache. The one that sounds like it's coming from somewhere much deeper than it should. And if you hear it, if you feel the walls starting to thin, leave. Just leave. Don't look back. Unless, of course, you're meant to be the witness. Then you'll stay, you'll watch, you'll remember. Just like I do, every single day. But here's the thing I haven't told anyone. Last week, I got a call. A young couple looking for a wedding venue. Their families are old Iowa stock. Been here since the town was founded. And their names, Thompson and Miller. Different first names, but the same families. The same bound bloodlines. 97 years early. Something's changed. Something's wrong. The walls are thinning faster than they should. And I don't know if one wedding party will be enough this time. I need to go, need to research, need to prepare. But if you know anything about St. Matthew's, if your family has stories, please share them. Comment below. Help me understand what's happening. Because I have a terrible feeling that this time, when the door opens, it won't close again. And we'll all be witnesses to what comes through. Story number 4. Have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to see? Something that defies explanation, that makes you question your own sanity? I have. And I haven't slept properly since. It happened 3 years ago in a small coastal town in Maine, but the memory remains as vivid as if it were yesterday. Before I begin tonight's story, I need to warn you. What I'm about to share might leave you looking over your shoulder for weeks. You might find yourself double-checking locked doors or avoiding certain places after dark. If that doesn't bother you, then settle in. And if you've experienced something similar, maybe drop a comment below. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the only one who's witnessed something like this, or if others have stories they're too afraid to tell. So dim your lights, get comfortable, and prepare yourself. The story is about to begin. I never planned to stay in Millbrook Cove for more than a weekend. It was supposed to be a quick stop on my road trip down the East Coast. Just another quaint New England town to check off my list before heading to Boston. I pulled my Honda Civic into town just as the sun was setting behind the pines. The late September air had that peculiar crispness that seems to sharpen every sense. I could smell the salt from the nearby ocean, hear the distant foghorn. feel the slight dampness that clung to everything. The Harborview Inn was my lodging for the night, a Victorian house perched on a small hill overlooking the bay. The proprietor, Mrs. Caldwell, was a woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed both kind and suspicious at the same time. "Just passing through?" she asked, sliding an actual metal key across the antique reception desk. "Room 7. "Just for tonight," I confirmed. "I'm heading to Boston tomorrow." She nodded, but something in her expression made me uneasy. "Well, enjoy your stay. Breakfast is from 7 to 9, and—" She hesitated, her voice dropping slightly. "We lock the doors at 11. If you're out later, you'll need to use the side entrance. The code is 1857. "Thanks," I said, picking up my overnight bag. "Any recommendations for dinner?" "Molly's Diner on Main Street. Best clam chowder on the coast. But don't stay out too late." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The fog gets thick after dark." I thanked her and headed to my room. It was charming in that old-fashioned way. Floral wallpaper, a 4-poster bed with a handmade quilt, and windows that looked out over the harbor. The sun had nearly disappeared now, leaving streaks of orange and purple across the sky. Below, the little fishing boats bobbed gently in the water. There was something peaceful about it all. And yet, I couldn't shake a subtle feeling of wrongness, like the town was holding its breath. Molly's Diner was exactly what you'd expect. Checkered tile floors, vinyl booths, and a jukebox that probably hadn't been updated since the 80s. Despite being dinner time, only 3 other tables were occupied: an elderly couple eating in silence, a middle-aged man reading a newspaper, and a family of 4 who spoke in hushed tones. As I ate my delicious clam chowder, I watched the street outside gradually empty of people. By 8:30, Main Street was deserted, though lights still glowed in shop windows and upstairs apartments. The little bell above the diner door jingled, and a man in his 40s entered, stamping his feet as though shaking off water, though it wasn't raining. He wore a fisherman's jacket and had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. "The usual, Jim?" asked the waitress. "Thanks, Di." His voice was gruff but not unfriendly. "Fog's rolling in early tonight." She made a small sound of acknowledgement. "Supposed to be a new moon." "Yup." I couldn't quite understand why they were discussing the weather and moon phase with such gravity, but something in their tone made me uneasy. I finished my meal and stepped outside. The temperature had dropped considerably, and a light mist hung in the air. Not quite fog yet, but it was getting there. The street lamps created halos of light in the thickening atmosphere. Instead of heading straight back to the inn, I decided to take a short walk down to the harbor. The town was eerily quiet. No traffic, no pedestrians, no music from bars or restaurants. Just the distant sound of the ocean and the occasional creak of a sign swinging in the gentle breeze. The harbor was small but picturesque, with weathered docks and fishing boats tied up for the night. The fog was definitely thicker here, rolling in from the ocean in ghostly tendrils. I stood at the edge of the dock, breathing in the salt air. Maybe it was the unusual silence of the town, or the mist curling around my ankles. But I suddenly felt very much alone, and very much like I was being watched. It was then that I noticed something odd. Among the fishing boats was one that looked different, a sleek sailboat, entirely black from hull to mast. No name was visible on its side, no running lights, nothing to identify it. It simply sat there, unnaturally still despite the gentle movement of the water. As I stared at it, I became aware of a sound. Not the water lapping against the pilings, or the distant foghorn, but something else. A low hum, almost below the threshold of hearing. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. That's when I saw it. A figure standing on the deck of the black sailboat. Though the fog had thickened, I could make out the silhouette of a person, tall and unnaturally thin, standing perfectly still. I couldn't see a face, just a darker shape against the mist. I raised my hand in a tentative wave, feeling foolish even as I did so. The figure didn't move. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strangely muffled in the fog. No response. But the humming grew slightly louder. Common sense finally kicked in. It was getting late, the fog was thickening by the minute, and there was something decidedly unsettling about that boat and its motionless occupant. Time to head back to the inn. I turned to leave and found myself face to face with Jim from the diner. I gasped, stumbling backward. "Jesus, you scared me." "Sorry about that." He didn't sound sorry. His eyes flicked past me to the harbor, narrowing slightly. "You shouldn't be down here after dark." "I was just taking a walk," I explained, feeling oddly defensive. "Heading back to the harbor view now." He nodded, still looking past me. "I'll walk with you. It's easy to get turned around in the fog." As we walked, I couldn't help asking, "Is there something special about that black sailboat? The one without any markings?" His stride faltered for just a moment. "What boat?" "The black sailboat in the harbor. I just saw someone standing on it." Jim stopped walking entirely, turning to face me. In the glow of a nearby street lamp, I could see his expression, a mixture of concern and what looked like fear. "There's no black sailboat in Millbrook Harbor," he said quietly. "Never has been." I frowned. "But I just saw it. It was right there, tied up at the dock. Listen." His voice was low, intense. "Whatever you think you saw, forget about it. This town..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "This town has peculiarities, things that don't make sense to outsiders. It's best not to dwell on them." I wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped me. There was a warning there. Not a threat, but genuine concern. "Let's get you back to the inn," he said, resuming our walk at a brisker pace. At the foot of the steps, Jim paused. "You're leaving tomorrow?" I nodded. "Good." He seemed relieved. "Drive safe and..." He hesitated. "If I were you, I'd keep my door locked tonight. Don't go wandering, no matter what you hear." Despite my exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. I lay there, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the old inn, the settling of wooden beams, the distant hum of the heating system, the muffled sound of the foghorn, and underneath it all, just at the edge of perception, that same humming I'd heard at the harbor. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the sound seemed to be growing louder, more insistent. That's when I noticed the fog outside my window had taken on a faint bluish glow. Not bright, but distinct, a cool, phosphorescent light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the humming. I sat up in bed, staring at the phenomenon. As I watched, the glow intensified slightly, enough that I could now see the fog swirling in distinct patterns. It no longer moved like natural mist, but seemed almost deliberate. Searching. I slipped out of bed and approached the window cautiously. The glass was now completely fogged over from the outside, blocking my view. Without thinking, I reached out and wiped a small circle clear with my palm. I immediately wished I hadn't. There, suspended in the glowing mist not 10 feet from my second-story window, was a face. Not a human face, at least not entirely. It had the general structure of a face, with features in approximately the right places, but everything was subtly, horribly wrong. The eyes were too large and widely spaced, the nose barely a suggestion, and the mouth stretched impossibly wide across what should have been its lower face, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I stumbled backward with a strangled cry, my heart hammering against my ribs. The face remained at the window, unmoving. Those two large eyes fixed on me with unmistakable awareness. The humming grew louder, no longer at the edge of hearing, but filling the room like the drone of 1,000 invisible insects. The blue glow intensified, seeping around the edges of the window frame, casting the room in an otherworldly light. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the face withdrew, sliding sideways out of view. The glow dimmed, the humming receded, and I was left alone in my room with only the sound of my ragged breathing. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, afraid to approach the window again. When I finally gathered enough courage to move, it was to grab my phone from the nightstand. No signal, of course. The bedside clock read 11:11 p.m. A sudden knock at my door nearly stopped my heart. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly high-pitched. "Who is it?" No answer. Just another knock, more insistent this time. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. The knocking stopped, then a voice, female, but with an odd hollow quality that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Let me in." The words were clear despite their strange timbre. "I need help." I moved closer to the door, but something stopped me from reaching for the handle. Jim's warning echoed in my head. "Keep your door locked tonight. Don't go wandering, no matter what you hear." "Who are you?" I asked, my hand hovering near but not touching the doorknob. "Please!" The voice sounded desperate now. "The fog! It's coming! Let me in!" I pulled my hand back. I'm going to call the manager," I said, backing away from the door. Silence. Then a sound that will haunt me until my dying day. A long, slow exhale that gradually transformed into a low, rumbling growl. No human throat could have produced that sound. I stumbled backward until my legs hit the bed, never taking my eyes off the door. The handle began to turn slowly, deliberately. The lock held, thank God, but the door itself began to bulge inward as if tremendous pressure was being applied from the hallway. The wood creaked and groaned. Thin cracks appeared around the frame. The humming returned, louder than ever, accompanied by a blue glow seeping under the door. The pressure on the door increased. The wood splintered along the edges with sharp, gunshot-like cracks. The blue glow beneath it intensified, casting strange, shifting shadows across the ceiling. I lunged for the window, wiping away the condensation with my sleeve. The fog outside was now so thick and so luminous that it was like looking into a glowing blue void. No ground visible below, no buildings across the street, nothing but that uncanny mist. Behind me, the door gave another ominous crack. I fumbled with the window latch, my fingers clumsy with panic. It was old and stiff, but finally gave way with a metallic squeal. I pushed the window up, feeling the rush of cold, damp air against my face. The fog immediately began to pour into the room like liquid, bringing with it that strange humming sound and the scent of something ancient and briny. For a moment I hesitated. The door continued to bend inward, the lock straining audibly. The blue fog filling my room seemed almost sentient, curling around my ankles like a curious animal. Jump to the ground below? Or face whatever was trying to get through that door? That's when I heard it. A different sound cutting through the humming. A police siren, growing louder. Red and blue lights began to penetrate the fog, creating a purple strobe effect that was somehow even more disorienting than the blue glow. The pressure in the room changed. The humming faltered, then intensified to an almost painful degree. The blue fog retreated rapidly, sucked back out the window as if by a powerful vacuum. I clung to the windowsill to avoid being pulled out with it. And then, silence. The humming stopped. The blue glow vanished. The fog outside remained, but it was just normal fog now, white and formless. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see in the doorway, but there was nothing there except the splintered remains of my door, hanging from one hinge. The hallway beyond was empty and dark. Police sirens wailed outside, closer now. I grabbed my phone, keys, and jacket. No way was I staying in that room a minute longer. I made my way downstairs, expecting at any moment to run into Mrs. Caldwell or other guests awakened by the commotion. But the inn was eerily silent. No lights came on, no doors opened. It was as if I were the only person in the building. The front door was locked. just as Mrs. Caldwell had warned. I fumbled with the deadbolt and finally burst out onto the front porch. The police car was parked at the curb, its lights strobing through the fog. A figure emerged from the driver's side, tall, wearing the distinctive hat of a state trooper. "Hey!" I called out, my voice cracking with relief. "Up here! I need help!" The figure turned toward me, but didn't respond. Something about its silhouette made me pause. It seemed too tall, too still. The trooper took a step forward, and the fog swirled around him, momentarily illuminated by the cruiser's lights. For just a second, I caught a glimpse of his face. There was no face, just smooth, featureless skin where features should have been. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't help, this was something else. I ran, down the porch steps, away from the inn, away from the fake police car, into the fog-shrouded street. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but I ran anyway, guided by memory and desperation. The humming followed me, rising and falling like a predator's call. Occasionally, the fog would thin just enough for me to glimpse shapes moving within it. Tall, unnaturally thin figures that seemed to glide rather than walk. Eventually, I found myself back at the harbor, drawn there by the sound of water and the slightly less oppressive fog. The black sailboat was closer to shore now, and there was definitely something, standing on its deck. The same tall, thin silhouette I'd seen earlier. As I watched, a small rowboat detached from the sailboat's side and began moving toward the dock. It made no sound as it cut through the water, and I couldn't see anyone rowing it. It simply moved, as if pulled by an invisible thread. The rowboat rocked gently as I climbed in, settling under my weight. As soon as I was seated, it began to move, pulling away from the dock with the same unseen force that had brought it in. I gripped the sides, heart pounding, as it carried me through the glowing fog toward the black sailboat. The figure on deck became clearer. It was a man, or had been once. He stood unnaturally still, his back to me, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned sailor's coat. Even from behind, I could tell something was wrong with his proportions. His arms were too long, his torso too narrow. The rowboat bumped gently against the sailboat's hull. A rope ladder hung down, swaying slightly despite the lack of wind. With shaking hands, I grabbed the ladder and began to climb. Slowly, with a fluid motion that seemed almost mechanical, the figure turned. What faced me was not a man, not anymore. It had the general shape of a human, wore clothes like a human, but its face was a void. Not featureless like the trooper had been, but absent entirely. Where a face should have been was only emptiness, a kind of hole in reality that my eyes couldn't properly focus on. I stumbled backward, a scream building in my throat. The figure raised one impossibly long arm, pointing not at me, but past me, toward the town. Despite my terror, I turned to look. Millbrook Cove was gone. Where the town should have been was only blue-tinged fog, swirling and pulsing with otherworldly light. Shadows moved within it, tall, thin shapes that drifted rather than walked. And in the center of it all, a kind of vortex was forming, a spiraling tunnel of mist and light that seemed to lead elsewhere. As I watched, the vortex grew, expanding outward. The buildings at the edge of town, what I could see of them through the fog, began to waver, like reflections in disturbed water. Then, one by one, they simply ceased to be. Not destroyed, not consumed, but erased, as if they had never existed at all. The faceless figure beside me made a sound, not speech, but a kind of resonant vibration that I somehow understood as communication. It was showing me something, wanting me to witness this. The vortex continued to grow. More buildings vanished, streets, cars, trees, all gone in an instant, leaving nothing but empty space that was quickly filled by the glowing fog. The harbor itself began to change, the water darkening, thickening, becoming something that wasn't quite water anymore. I realized then what I was witnessing, the end of Millbrook Cove. Not a disaster, not a supernatural attack, but an erasure. The town wasn't being destroyed, it was being removed from existence. The vortex reached the edge of the harbor. The dock vanished. The water began to spiral, drawn toward the center of the phenomenon. The sailboat itself began to move, pulled by the same force, rotating slowly as it was drawn toward the vortex. I closed my eyes, certain that whatever waited in the center of that spiraling void was not meant for human eyes. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only stand there as the faceless entity's cold hand held me in place. The humming reached a crescendo, so loud it felt like my skull might shatter. The blue light penetrated even my closed eyelids, filling my vision with uncanny brilliance. And then, silence. Darkness. The sensation of falling, or perhaps flying. Movement without direction through a space that wasn't space at all. I woke up on a beach, not the harbor of Millbrook Cove, but a wide, sandy stretch I didn't recognize. The rising sun cast long shadows across the dunes. My clothes were dry, not even damp from the fog that had seemed so impenetrable just hours ago. Days? I had no way to know how much time had passed. I sat up, disoriented and aching. My phone was still in my pocket, but dead. No sign of the sailboat, the faceless figure, or the town that had vanished before my eyes. Had it all been a nightmare? A hallucination? I might have convinced myself of that if not for one thing. My shoulder, where the faceless entity had touched me, bore a perfect handprint. Not a bruise or a burn, but a kind of absence of color, as if all pigment had been drawn out of my skin in the exact shape of an impossibly elongated hand. I eventually made my way to a gas station about a mile from the beach. The attendant didn't recognize the name Millbrook Cove when I asked for directions. According to him, there had never been a town by that name anywhere in coastal Maine. For days, I wandered the coast, trying to find some trace of the town or its inhabitants. I returned to where I thought the harbor had been, but found only pristine shoreline, untouched by human development. No docks, no buildings, nothing to suggest a town had ever existed there. It was at a roadside diner about 30 miles away that I met Ellen, a waitress in her 50s who turned pale when I mentioned Millbrook Cove. "I know what you're looking for," she whispered. "It's gone. They're all gone." She had been born there but left when she was 18. Her entire family had stayed behind. "We called it the tide," she explained. "Not a real tide, but something else. Something that comes when the balance tips too far." Millbrook Cove, she told me, had been built on an arrangement with the entities from the Black Boat. Safe harbor, prosperous fishing, protection from storms, in exchange for tribute. One person, every new moon, willingly taken to the other side. But something changed, I guessed. People stopped believing. The old ways became jokes, tourist attractions. The rituals were performed less carefully than barely at all. The last proper tribute was given almost 60 years ago. She shrugged helplessly. The balance tipped too far. The debt grew too large. And so the tide came to collect everything at once. "But you survived," I pointed out. "You remember. I remember. How is that possible? Those who leave before their 18th birthday are exempt from the arrangement. As for you," she studied me curiously. "You were marked." Her eyes flicked to my shoulder. "They wanted you to remember, to witness. That's unusual." She told me the mark would fade eventually, and with it, most of my memories of that night. Enough to let you sleep at night at least. But she was wrong about that. It's been 3 years. The mark faded 6 months after that night, just as Ellen predicted. And yes, some details have grown fuzzy. The exact layout of the town, the names of the people I met. But I haven't forgotten the important parts. Not the blue fog, or the faceless entities, or the sight of an entire town being erased from existence. I still dream about it. In my dreams, I'm back on that black sailboat, watching as the vortex consumes Millbrook Cove. But in the dreams, I can see inside the vortex. It's not destruction or oblivion, it's somewhere else. The people of Millbrook weren't destroyed. They were transformed, relocated. I've tried to find Ellen again, but the diner where she worked has no record of an employee by that name. Sometimes I wonder if she, too, has been erased. If the entities decided her exemption had expired, or if her memories had become dangerous somehow. I can't shake the feeling that Millbrook Cove wasn't a unique event. How many other small towns have disappeared throughout history, not through natural disaster or economic decline, but through erasure? I find myself studying maps obsessively, looking for gaps, places where towns should be but aren't. I research local legends about mysterious fogs, about people who vanish without trace, about communities that seem oddly isolated from the modern world. There's a small fishing village in Oregon that no one seems to visit or leave. A farming community in Nebraska where census data shows the same population count for the last 70 years. A mining town in Colorado where GPS systems consistently malfunction, where travelers report missing time. Are these places like Millbrook Cove? Are they maintaining their arrangements better? Or are they already gone, existing now only as memories in the minds of those who were marked? I don't know, and I'm afraid to find out. Afraid that if I dig too deeply, if I get too close to the truth, I might attract attention. Their attention. As for me, the dreams are getting worse. More vivid, more frequent. Sometimes, now I hear the humming even when I'm awake. And occasionally, in the corner of my eye, I glimpse movement in fog that isn't quite normal fog. The mark on my shoulder has been gone for years, but last week I noticed something. A faint discoloration on my palm, in the shape of what might be fingers. Long, thin fingers. I think they're coming back for me. Not to harm me, but to show me more. To make me witness something else, something bigger. I've considered running, hiding, but what's the point? If they've chosen me again, distance won't matter. No place is far enough to escape entities that can erase towns from reality itself. So, I wait, and I watch the fog, and I listen for that distinctive humming that signals their approach. Watch for the signs, the unusual fog, the black boats with no markings, the humming at the edge of hearing. If you notice these things, run, don't look back, don't ask questions, just get as far away as you can. And if, some night, you find yourself unable to sleep, troubled by dreams of blue mist and faceless entities, check your shoulder. Check for a mark. If you find one, then you too have been chosen to witness. And I am so sorry. Because once they've marked you, it's only a matter of time before they return. Before they show you something you can never unsee, never forget, no matter how desperately you might wish to. I hear the humming now, growing louder by the second. Outside my window, normal evening fog is taking on a faint blue tinge. It's happening again, just as I feared. The fog is glowing brighter now. The humming has become a physical sensation, vibrating through my bones. I can see shapes moving within the mist, tall, thin shapes with 2 long limbs. They've come for me. If you've read this far, if you've taken this warning to heart, then perhaps it hasn't all been for nothing. Perhaps you'll be spared what I've experienced, what I'm about to experience. Or perhaps you too will someday find yourself standing on a black sailboat, watching as reality itself unravels before your eyes, marked as a witness to the inexplicable. Either way, remember this: not all disappearances are what they seem. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't what vanishes, it's what remains behind to tell the tale. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more spooky tales that'll keep you up at night. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Share your stories below. I read every comment. And remember to check out my other videos for more bone-chilling content that'll make you think twice about what lurks in the fog. Listen the whispers and make a decision whether we are going to cooperate with the whispers or we just want to skip them. But actually, no one can skip these whispers. If you walk away from them, they will run towards you until they reach you. They confront you, make you pay, make you suffer the same thing they suffer. There is no escape from them. If you want to escape, help them, so they can have peace, and you also can have it. Help, or you will ask for help soon. So, the end of today's video has arrived. Share your personal horror experiences in the comments. Also, comment the part of the story that you find the most horror and terrifying. If you like this video, leave a like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Also, ring the bell icon so you don't miss the upcoming videos. Remember, don't run from whispers, because they follow you. They know you. They want you to listen, just confront them. Now, sleep well, or should I say, have a haunted night.